screen and I'll tell you so that you can start that.
Okay, shall we start?
And I'll tell you so that you can start that.
Okay.
I think, yeah. But let's wait a minute to be sure. Okay, yes.
Shall we start?
Yes, you can.
Perfect. Then good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our YouTube broadcast of a very special panel discussion titled What Difference Can Rotating Presidents Make? My name is Ece Özbey. I'm an awesome fellow at the Central European University Democracy Institute, and I serve as the editor for the Global Forum Populism Hub at the Institute's online journal, The Review of Democracy. Thank you all for tuning in to this live stream that is kindly hosted by these two institutions, CEU Democracy Institute and the RevDem. If you are here with us today, I reckon you're interested in reflections, analysis, and research on the status, survival, and prosperity of democracies worldwide, which is exactly what we deliver. So I encourage you to visit our website at revdem.ceu.edu and explore our latest articles, opinion pieces, interviews, other panel discussions just like this one, as well as our podcast series where we host in-depth conversations with prominent scholars and policymakers. So today we have gathered to reflect on some critical questions surrounding the recent Hungarian presidency of the Council of the European Union, the newly begun Polish presidency, and the broader challenges currently facing the EU, including the Russian-Ukrainian war, Donald Trump's return to the White House, the rising tensions between liberal and illiberal forces worldwide. And with so much at stake, this discussion, I think, could not be more timely or relevant. And we are very fortunate to have three leading experts from different backgrounds with us. First, we have Laszlo Brutz, who's a professor of sociology and the director of the Democracy Institute at the CEU, whose extensive research spans transnationalization, institutional development, economic transition, civil society, and more. Laszlo has taught at various academic institutions worldwide, including the European Union Institute, Cornell University, the University of Notre Dame, and of course the CEU, where he also served as the acting rector and president back in the day. And we have Monika Sus, who's an associate professor at the Polish Academy of Sciences, and a research fellow at the Center for International Security at the Hertie School in Berlin, and a member of the Team Europe Direct Poland network. Monika's research mainly focuses on European and transatlantic security cooperation and entrepreneurship in the EU's foreign and security policy. Last but not least, we have Daniel Hegedüs. Daniel is the regional director at the German Marshall Fund, with expertise in democratic backsliding and populism, particularly in Central and Eastern Europe. He has a truly international, interdisciplinary background, nested in political science, history, and European law, and he has worked at a variety of institutions as well, including the Freedom House, the German Council on Foreign Relations, and the German Institute for International and Security Affairs. Well, it's a pleasure and a privilege to have such distinguished speakers with us. Many thanks to all three of you for joining and sharing your insights with us today. Let me very briefly outline how this discussion will unfold. We will jump straight into a moderated discussion with our panelists, followed by a brief Q&A discussion. For those of you watching, feel free to drop your questions in the YouTube chat throughout the event, but kindly keep them brief and to the point, and we will try to address as many as possible during the Q&A at the end. So with that, I suggest we begin perhaps by evaluating the second half of 2024 in retrospect. And Laszlo, if I may turn to you first. Let's start with this question. How unusual was the Hungarian presidency in your opinion? How successful was it? How unsuccessful was it? And how has the EU dealt with the Hungarian government's agenda during this period?
Thanks a lot for the question. I think you stressed very strongly the most important part, that the EU faces lots of different conflicts, I would say even crises, both geopolitical, geoeconomic. From this perspective, the Hungarian presidency didn't make any difference. It had some minor effects. In general, in the very complex European and EU decision-making systems, the presidencies play a minimal role, not the most important role at all, so it doesn't make a big difference. And the Hungarian presidency happened in a period when there was not much space for decision-making, partly because divisions within the EU and partly because the European Parliament was not in session. So I would not say that there were no results of that, and I hope that also my colleagues will have examples also for that. But in general, the big picture is, I think, the one that you described in your introduction, that there are big problems, huge challenges at the level of EU that neither Hungary nor Poland, perhaps Poland a little better, but we will talk about that. I think Monica will talk about that more. But it's very not easy equations.
Okay, thank you so much, Laszlo. And Daniel, would you agree that the Hungarian presidency did not make much difference, or do you have a different perspective on this as someone interested in democratic backsliding and populism?
Thank you so much. I think I have a slightly different take on this, and I think the difference stems actually from different measurement sticks. I completely agree with Laszlo that rarely any EU rotating council presidency leaves a huge policy or institutional impact behind. Although I think we could just name a few: 2007 German presidency, which pushed through the Lisbon Treaty just to counterbalance it with a negative German impact. 2020 presidency, when actually in December of the year, Angela Merkel pushed through the investment and trade agreement with China. But we can also mention actually the French and the Czech presidencies from 2022, when I think these countries, with their very, I would say, impactful and effective diplomatic work, just prepare the European Union to respond properly to the full invasion of Ukraine by Russia. If that's the measurement, then yes, I think the institutional impact of the Hungarian presidency was minimal, but I think the perception is different from this take. Because I think the Hungarian presidency was unique in many respects, and I would say even a pioneer. It happens very rarely that actually a country is in the role of the honest broker and matchmaker who has so widely outlier positions on strategic issues to compare to the mainstream. And obviously, it's not a good starter if someone needs to build consensus among the member states. It's also pretty unique that a country is in the driving seat who is so widely distrusted among the partners. It's also, I think, unique is an understatement that a country being in the position of the rotating presidency, engaging in conscious and active disruption of the EU policy positions and the policy agenda. This was certainly the case with the so-called peace mission diplomatic offensive in the first week of July. And this was certainly also the case in October, when actually the Hungarian state actively interfered in the elections in Georgia. I am not stating that Hungary was a game changer, that actually the Georgian Dream Party could stabilize and cement its power after the fraudulent elections, but that an EU member state actually contributed with a negative impact. It's pretty unique. And just to summing up the list of the uniqueness, I think it happens very rarely that a country engages in conscious misrepresentation of the European Union. What happened, for example, again, in the frame of the peace mission when with the bilateral meeting with Vladimir Putin, actually Prime Minister Orban used the Council presidency logo. And when Vladimir Putin stated that he is representing the European Union, then Prime Minister Orban didn't correct actually that record. So there was always, or at least very frequently, the misrepresentation that it was unclear for partners whether he's speaking in the name of the European Union or he's only representing Hungarian diplomatic positions. And I think, especially from the perspective of Georgian domestic politics, it mattered a lot, actually, after, for example, he acknowledged the election victory of Georgian Dream. And it happens also rarely, and this is the last point, that a country in this position acts against adopted joint EU positions. His participation at the meeting with the representatives of the state of the Turkey Council, where actually he sat at the table together with the representative of the Turkish Republic of Cyprus, went against all European positions. And it was not a surprise that it actually invited the reaction of the High Representative for Foreign and Security Policy from the European Union, but it's also the case with Georgia. He supported actually a domestic player who clearly violated all EU values and also actually the association partnership with the European Union. So the list, I think, why the Hungarian EU presidency was unique is pretty long. And I wouldn't understate the importance of this, because just what we see in the domestic politics of many EU member states, he actually moved the bar of what is acceptable, what can be said, and what can be done in this position. And obviously, it's a different question, and I wouldn't like to abuse the available time, but I am not certain whether the responses on the part of the European Union and other EU member states actually lived up to the level of the challenge, what he posed to the common position and actually the joint interest of the European Union. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Well, we have two equally interesting but clearly diverging opinions here. And I think, Monica, your comment will be the tiebreaker. Would you like to add any thoughts on this?
Well, I wouldn't dare, because we just heard two very strong Hungarian voices on this issue. And I can only basically say that I agree with both. So I think there are extremely strong limitations to what the presidency can actually do. And this would be also my point for the Polish case. But at the same time, I totally buy into the argument by Daniel that, well, I mean, if anything, that it was lots of harm that the Hungarian presidency really made for the internal cohesion, let's say, of the European Union. But also, I think, that, well, considering how the last 6 months in the EU looked like, meaning that we haven't really had a commission, right? So it was very difficult for the administration of the EU to actually react to Orban's doings. So I am not saying, that we should continue with this line of basically not responding strongly to what Orban is doing. But I would, well, cut some slack, let's say, to the new administration now, hoping that they will move the bar to the right place and that they will react strongly to the case of Hungary, basically, well, violating a number of rule of law instruments and politics. But again, Hungary is the extreme case, but I am afraid that we are looking into a period of many more cases coming in the same direction, unfortunately.
Thank you, Monica. I feel like Laszlo wants to come back in and make a couple of additions.
Just one. Thank you. I think that there was no contradiction, so no conflict in our representation. I was talking about the perspective of the European Union and the dilemmas and challenges of European Union. And basically, Daniel described how Orban and Orban regime misused the presidency for geopolitical ends. These guys make world record in using such a short time for getting geopolitical ends from US, from Russia, from Turkey, and I can go on. And so Daniel was very precise in describing exactly that. And that from that perspective, that was a success for Orban.
I see. Thank you so much for the clarification. And from here, where we left off at the end of 2024, allow me to, invite you back to the present, or even better, to the future. My question is, what are the major ambitions of the current Polish presidency, and how would you assess their chances of success in the next 6 months? Daniel, would you like to share your thoughts first?
So if we started with Hungarians commenting the Hungarian Council presidency, then it would be absolutely unfair if not Monica would start on that point. So
That's a fair criticism. Then, please.
Sure, of course. Thank you very much. Let me say that after what we just heard about the Hungarian presidency, then I think for Poland, the situation looks quite different. I mean, Poland is really, now one of the strongest players at the European arena. Not because Poland is so strong per se, but also because other countries, especially France and Germany, are internally quite weak right now. So this moves Poland to a position of power to some extent, but I wouldn't exaggerate that. So let's really see how the world looks like or how the European Union looks like in 6 months. But talking about ambitions, I think I would like to mention 3 major points that kind of, stand out from the very long program of the Polish presidency. I mean, the document that we learned to see in December, and also there's already a presidency trio program with Denmark and Cyprus that are coming next. But focusing on Poland, and the 3 issues that I would like to highlight is so first of all, it's about enlargement. So it will be about enlargement because the overall topic is security. And Poland sees security, with many different dimensions, but obviously hard security, due to the geographical position of Poland, is the dimension that Poland actually wants to focus on. And enlargement falls into this category to some extent, because we are talking about strengthening Ukrainian resilience towards Russia, but also about preparing Ukraine, also other countries, but Poland will focus on Ukraine and Moldova mostly, and these portfolios for the future membership. So that's the first issue. The second issue, and I mentioned that already, is about strengthening security in all these various dimensions, but focusing again on hard security measures. And here I think that Poland, or that's what has been announced already, will try to move on 2 portfolios mostly. The one is finding money for strengthening the defense industrial cooperation in Europe. So we all agree for quite some time now that we need to have stronger European industry. We do not agree, however, how we should finance that. And of course, Poland won't be a game changer here, but it can be a broker, and it can be a country that will try, to put this topic on the agenda, but also to try to facilitate a consensus among various ideas that are now on the table. And another portfolio on security is EU-NATO cooperation. So that's also something that is super important for Poland. And I think, I am not stating the obvious here when I say that it is the Eastern flank country. We have a war with Russia, and that's what, of course, matters for Poland, also from the perspective of the, incoming president of the United States. But I think that's for another discussion. And the third and the last point would be economic competitiveness and resilience. And here the Polish presidency team talks mostly about having robust cohesion policies and about innovation. So I think that the Polish government is very much aware that you cannot talk about hard security measures without talking also about the economic resilience of the European Union. It has to go hand in hand. And I think this will be the 3 issues that I would see Poland moving on within the next 6 months.
Thank you, Monica. I think you brilliantly laid out the potential ambitions of the Polish presidency. Daniel, would you like to weigh in at this point and share your insights about how likely that they will succeed on these variety of topics?
I absolutely agree with Monica, and just would like to make some additional points. Actually, with starting with some expectation management. I think if they muddle through, it will more or less equal to success. We don't need to have large expectations on closed files. Practically, if Europe in this period will be able to manage its relationship primarily with its main transatlantic partner and demonstrate some advancement, especially on the defense procurement and other security-related issues, I think we will be absolutely well positioned to congratulate to our Polish friends. I would like to chime in on a point made by Monica at the beginning that Poland can play a leadership role because the Franco-German tandem is not actually in a position to lead. I would add some potentially additional aspects to this. I think Poland is well versed in some way to be the first among the equals and demonstrate some leadership, because I think it is distinguished in two aspects currently from France and Germany. One, the Polish leadership has a bipartisan and strategic clarity. What's at stake for Poland actually in the conflict with Russia, and what's at stake in Ukraine, and they have ambition actually to deliver. And these are two things what I think are fundamentally missed today, both in Berlin and Paris. Just to underline, Germany is the second largest supporter of Ukraine, both in terms of military aid and potentially the largest in economic terms, without any ambition and without actually reaping the benefits of that contribution. And if we would ask German foreign policy thinkers what are the strategic interests of Germany and what they would like to achieve, I doubt that we will get very straightforward and clear answers. The situation in Warsaw would be completely different. I fully agree with Monica that especially at the defense procurement part, Poland is very well versed to be an honest broker. For the simple reason because it has a huge stake in the game, actually has currently the largest conventional army within the European Union. But the Polish defense industry is not highly integrated in the European defense conglomerates because it's mainly US capital and US technology which operates there. And therefore, I think they can be honest brokers within Europe, actually, because they are not partisan in this issue. Meanwhile, they can also represent that story towards Washington, what certainly needs a good ambassador, because it's one thing that Donald Trump would like to see European defense contribution rising, but I think he also would like to see a large part of that money actually spent with US defense procurement, the US contractors, and in that case, the EU needs a good ambassador. And the same goes for the relationship with NATO, and I am stopping here. Actually, Poland is the country which has size and is already fulfilling a large part of the demands of the new US administration when it comes to defense spending. I completely understand that in a lot of the cases, the rotating presidency is not the agent who is representing the European Union in the foreign affairs. But the wrong news here is that Donald Trump doesn't care. So the institution of EU integration, I think, will lose weight and gravity because Washington will primarily see member states as interlocutors. And Poland is, I think, well versed to play this role of interlocutor in the next 6 months. And I'm stopping here. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Laszlo, the same question to you, but I'm particularly interested in your take regarding the point made by both Daniel and Monica regarding this leadership vacuum, this void, and Poland's relatively, stable, strong government against Franco-German accesses, waning power, let's say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a very important point because this in Hungary or wherever, but it's in general at the level of European Union. There is no agreed agreement about what to do with this multiplicity of crises and challenges. And so what is very clear, for example, Monica mentioned the Ukraine issue. Poland is a very good case. Poland is divided. On the one hand, this is one of the strongest supporters of Ukraine. On the other hand, that's where resistance to membership is one of the most visible in Europe, meaning just think of the transportation or the agriculture. There people are up in the arms to have solutions. Now, just to be brief, what the Polish presidency is challenging this field is twofold. One is that it's very clear that the previous strategy of integration, enlargement, can create Orban type of regimes and Kaczynski types of regimes. It furthers economic nationalism, Euroscepticism, and so on, mainly because it's focusing on compliance, on transferring 100,000 pages of rules without considering the longer-term social, political, and economic consequences in this country. So that's an outdated strategy that didn't work already in the previous Big Bang enlargement and will not work in Ukraine. That's one part of it. So it means that there is a need for changing integration strategy. And that would, of course, need extending these different experiences that are ongoing at European level in industrial policy or financing economic change to Ukraine. But then is this problem that I mentioned that is also very visible in Poland, that the European Union is not ready to take Ukraine. That's a growing tension. That if you would like to integrate a new economy, then you have to introduce policies that make integration a win-win outcome. Yes, and that is also missing. I think that Daniel mentioned that Germany is paying a lot, but doesn't have a vision about how to use these monies, how to solve this problem. So Poland is perhaps the most benign player in this whole thing, but is split. I cross my fingers that our friends in Warsaw will find ways to make at least a step in the right direction. And I don't even talk about the competitiveness and what also Monica mentioned. That's also a very big dilemma, very much linked to the problem of weakness of leadership in Europe. Yeah? Germany and France are having a split vision about competitiveness, because on the one hand, they talk a lot about European competitiveness, but they would not give up, for example, state aid at the level of the member states that gives special treatment to German and French firms, that fragments the market and weakens basically the creation of worldwide competitive value chains. So there are dilemmas that our friends in Warsaw have to face.
Thank you, Laszlo. I mean, amidst these many dilemmas, many issues that we need to discuss, I think we also are bound to address the elephant in the room across the ocean. You already mentioned his name a couple of times, but within a mere couple of days, Donald Trump will return to the office and start his second term as the US president. So this was the question I was saving for you, Monica, to start. But given your expertise in transatlantic relations and the EU foreign policy, what strategies should the EU prioritize to respond to potential challenges that lie ahead? Or to take a step back, are there any potential challenges, tied to the second term of Trump?
Well, there are numbers of challenges, that we probably will see. I mean, not probably, we will see challenges, definitely. I think the biggest challenge is actually that we don't really know what Trump is going to do. So I think that's the real elephant in the room for me. But I think the biggest challenge from the EU perspective is really the internal unity of the EU countries, right? Because I mean, if we want to respond to Trump, we have to be united. That's it's a basic issue, but it will be very difficult for the EU to stay united when confronted with Trump and with his, interesting ideas how to, for example, proceed with trade wars with different countries, how to annex some parts of the EU countries, and so on and so on. So I think that will be really the challenge that we'll face. And we already know, looking at the list of guests that Trump decided to invite to his inauguration, that the EU is not, let's put it this way, it's not really represented there. There are some EU leaders or leaders from certain parties, for example, from the Alternative for Germany, so the German extremely right-wing party, that are invited to the White House for the inauguration. Ursula von der Leyen has not been invited, for example, right? So this is, again, the unity point that I have been talking about. But I think, to put it perhaps in a more optimistic way, because I am really trying hard to be optimistic. I'm actually in Florence now. So if you are on the campus of the European University Institute, it kind of gives you optimism, because it's really beautiful and sunny out there. So on the optimistic note, I think what the EU countries, not so much the EU itself, but I mean the EU countries have to do is to, to kind of come to terms that the world is transactional, increasingly so. And Trump will, of course, push this forward. But on the optimistic note, perhaps some of you already read that, but yesterday the Pan-European think tank, European Council on Foreign Relations, actually released as a result of a survey that they made a couple of weeks ago and months ago. And there are a number of non-European countries like Brazil, India, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, Turkey, Korea, and Indonesia that actually tell or they see Europe as a quite powerful player, equally, powerful as perhaps US and China. So this is the external perspective on the EU. So I think, if we face, again, in a very optimistic way, the transactional world with, cherry picking to some extent how we handle transatlantic relations, then I think we have a chance, to survive the second Trump term. And I mean, we don't really have a choice. One issue, though, that I would like to end with is something that Donald Tusk is proposing, again, speaking to this transactional world of Trump that we will be having very soon. It's basically the idea that Europe has to put money on the table. So the more money we spend on defense, for example, that's the argument that Tusk has been constantly making in Warsaw, but also in many other European capitals. The more probable it is that Trump actually will stay committed to, to European security in the way or another. So we are not really aware, of how the situation will evolve, but we can increase our chances for a proper transatlantic relationship if we really invest and if we do our homework. And by us, I mean mostly the Western European countries, because as you all know, Poland has been already spending over than 4% of GDP on defense, and we are about to go until 5%, which brings another social problems, but that's not the topic of our discussion. So I will stop here.
Thank you, Monica. I think we all appreciate a little bit of optimism these days, but let me just switch the order a little bit and turn to Laszlo first. What is your take on the potential impact of Donald Trump's second presidency on the EU, particularly the institutional development and potential recalibration within the Union, and this transactional spirit that he will likely fuel further?
Yeah, I can freely speak about Trump because I don't know much about him. So. But I strongly agree with Monica about the effect of Firenze and the EU. I spent there 12 years, so I have an enormous lack of optimism that I could gather there. Now, coming back to Trump, his most important power is unpredictability. You cannot prepare for his actions. He comes up with different strategies and then changes it. And the same, you will see that with Ukraine, where in 24 hours he will create eternal peace, or in Middle East, and with the European issues. I think that Europe is not, let me put it nicely, not the first priority of the new presidency. So his problems are in other continents, first of all, Asia, and second, Middle East, Africa, and I think that's after that comes Europe. So, but I think that I cannot really add much more to what Monica said. So I would stop here.
Thank you, Laszlo, regardless. And Daniel, would you care to attempt to predict the unpredictable here? What should we expect during the second Trump presidency?
No, I wouldn't like to attempt to predict the unpredictable, but I think I have slightly different views on certain issues. So I think first we need to acknowledge that actually the US strategy to Europe is very self-contradictory. So Donald Trump presented actually a long list of demands And a lot of them make sense, even if it's presented in an unfriendly way. But if in the same time he meddles into European issues and actually supports European political players who make actually the delivery on those files much harder or even impossible, then it's ultimately also defeating the US goals. So, and somehow to counteract this, knowing, and I completely agree with Monica, that actually his main drive is transactionalism, I think Europe needs to be proactive to engage actually Trump. It has been happening over the past 6 to 7 months, but definitely since November, and clearly communicate that he cannot succeed in getting what he wants if he continues actually supporting those powers which are undermining European unity. And second, that Europe is ready to deliver on a couple of those files. And I think we should not deliver because he is demanding that, but we should deliver because it's in our best interest to deliver. I know that it's a particular position if someone is working for a transatlantic think tank, but it's not institutional position. It's my view that Europe cannot take over actually the role of guaranteeing its own security and supporting Ukraine, which in some aspects is contradictory, in some aspects it's interlinked with each other, for a couple of reasons. These are not mainly economic. We could just mention that Germany is the third largest economic power still in the world, and it would be a laughing stock if it couldn't at least finance actually support for Ukraine, but it's politically and socially not sustainable. And against that background, Europe needs the United States, and to keep the US as long as possible as a security guarantor in Europe and as a military supporter for Ukraine, we need to make those concessions which are inevitable for the US. That's defense spending, that's a more coordinated approach on China, and potentially that's buying more US energy in order somehow to balance actually the trade deficit what the US has towards the European Union. And because Donald Trump is transactionalist, I think we have a good chance to get a deal and a chance to keep this transatlantic partnership in some way or other. It won't be a love relationship, but it can be a functioning relationship. And it's important to keep it that way. So I'm stopping. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. I was actually about to ask, how do you see the EU's approach to the Russian-Ukrainian war evolving in light of these, things that we have discussed? You touched upon this already, but if you would like to add a couple of things, perhaps we can start with you and then turn to Monica and Laszlo.
Thank you. I can be brief. I think the main question is, what will the US do? Because I think we have seen the position of Donald Trump evolving over the past couple of weeks and months. It's not anymore one day, but rather 6 to 9 months during which he would like to achieve peace. But I think that will be a priority for him. If we take a look what happened on Sunday, that actually the negotiators of the Trump team were able, together with official US diplomacy, to achieve something like a preliminary peace deal between Hamas and Israel. A lot of Trump's legacy in the campaign period was actually attached to making peace between Russia and Ukraine. And I think the European diplomacy was successful over the past months in convincing Trump about a lot of things. First, that if he pressures Ukraine into a position to make a deal, which will be interpreted as a defeat, then it will ultimately also harm his reputation. The parallels will be made to the withdrawal from Afghanistan, and obviously allies in Asia will also take it as a blueprint. What can they expect actually from the United States in the future? So it's not in his interest to abandon Ukraine. Therefore, I think we have a time window until the US will remain here. And here the big question mark is how the European allies will use that time window. I think it's more or less a general agreement, and that includes also Ukraine, that negotiations are necessary. And also that the opportunity to regain actually the lost territories is not necessarily within reach. The big question mark is actually how the West can pressure Russia in the position that he's honestly, or that the country is honestly negotiating. And I think this is where we can't really see how things will evolve over the next 6 to 9 months, and what really the European role can be in it. But it's a matter of fact that we certainly need clarity in domestic issues in Germany and France as fast as possible. And Europe needs to use that time window, what the continent will get from Trump, to boost its defense, and also to try to formulate sustainable and also widely acceptable strategic goals for Ukraine and for the European security.
Thank you, Daniel. Who would like to go next? Laszlo, Monica?
Monica, if you have something, I have.
You can go first. I can add later with pleasure.
Just one thing, actually two. One is that in the calculations of Trump, since he is unpredictable, I don't know what role is played that China-Taiwan issue, but if he leaves Ukraine for Russia, then he will lose against China. So that's so to say the good news in this game, that if he's really transactional and not short-sighted, then he has interests in making the Ukrainian-Russian war, so the war integration to end up with a solution that does not encourage China to go against Taiwan. The European stance, I think that the real interesting thing, since both of you, Monica and also Daniel, correctly said that Europe is not a security giant, to put it mildly. It cannot defend itself and cannot create and maintain peace. It cannot and cannot win the war, but it can win the peace. And it could win the peace. And actually, that's why I'm looking very much on what happens in Poland now with this Polish presidency, because the real important thing for winning the peace is to have very stable democracy and flourishing economy in Ukraine. Now, Ukraine is in the process of deindustrialization and enormous indebtedness. So all these monies that flow to Poland, most of them is not grant, but credit. And it means that by the time they have to start reconstruction and build up a fantastic economy, by that time they will be more indebted than Poland was after '89. And that's a very big liability. So it means that Europe has to find a way to solve this dilemma, to make sure that the potential negative consequences of taking over 100,000 pages of regulations are managed in a way that there will be strong enough coalition of supporters of democracy and economic transformation, strong enough coalition of winners from that. If that happens, that one part of country, like in Poland or in Hungary, gets marginalized or gets outside, then that will create the social or political basis for Euroscepticism, populism, and so on, and Europe will lose the peace.
Thank you, Laszlo. Now, Monica, please.
Very briefly, because I mean, I can only agree with what has been said by both speakers. I would just like to highlight that, I mean, Trump is Trump, but Europe is Europe. So we have to ramp up defense production anyway. If Kamala Harris would have won the elections, we would have to do the same. So that's something that we have to do independently of who is in the White House. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is, even if really, as Daniel said, now we have like 6 months, 6 weeks or months, I'm not sure, because Trump keeps, changing the dates of him calling Putin, and we have a settlement. It won't end the war. It will freeze the conflict, but we cannot be sure that, the time that will then be gained by Russia won't be used to basically strengthen defense industry of the Russian Federation. And, in a couple of years, when the time is right, trying to move forward. And this is why we just have to, as the EU, as the European countries, and I mean by the European countries, not only the EU, so we are on the good path to strengthen the security relationship with the UK. We have to cooperate closely with Turkey. We have to cooperate with Norway. So basically, anyone who is on the continent should be really interested in, in basically strengthening our own capacities, because as Laszlo said, for now, we are absolutely not able to defend ourselves. But in 10 years' time, we have a chance that we'll be able to do this. So let's move there and, don't wait up until something happens in Washington, because this is something we can't control. Equally, as I totally agree with Laszlo, let's see what happens between China and Taiwan and how the US reacts to that. But these are things that, again, the EU cannot control. The only thing what we can control is how we and our policies are structured and how do we want to spend our money for the foreseeable future. But again, I am not saying that this is easy, because, spending money on defense will mean that we will have not enough money for several other portfolios and issues. So yeah, that's definitely a discussion that Europe has to have.
Thank you, Monica. I mean, there's still so much that we can and should discuss. We have touched upon, China, NATO, changing economic dynamics, changing, geopolitical alliances. We mentioned, the war in Gaza, the ceasefire deal potentially between Israel and Hamas. Unfortunately, we are running a bit short on time, so I would like to save my last question to something that is personally very interesting to me, very topical to Revdam's focus. So my question to you relates to this growing divide between illiberal and liberal forces worldwide, and particularly in Europe. And perhaps we can start with Monica this time in this last round. How do you see this going in the next couple of months, particularly just to tie it back to the presidency of the Council of European Union during this period?
Sure. Okay. So let me again focus on Poland, because I think that the other speakers can certainly cover this topic much better. So for Poland, we do not only have the EU Council presidency, but we do have presidential elections coming up in May. And again, as I have the impression, that since many years, every election in Poland is super important. And that's the election that, will basically show how the country will develop further to the greatest extent. And it is again the case with the presidential elections. Why? Because for now we have a president from a different political camp, the Law and Justice camp, and he cannot do as much as a French president can do, but he can do much more that the German president can do. So obstruction is something that Polish presidents can do if they want. So they can obstruct the policies of the government, and that's exactly what we have been witnessing in Poland for the last year, since we have the new government of the liberal forces in power. So if the candidate from the Law and Justice wins the elections, that I think that the comeback to power of the Law and Justice, maybe not certainly this party, but maybe a combination of parties, coalition of parties, it's unfortunately a question of time. So rather when than if. So I think that, that's one of the dangers I see for my country. If the presidential elections will be won by the candidate from the governing camp, basically, without putting any names here, because you all know the candidates, then I think we have a chance, and Laszlo elaborated on that already, to actually be a strong player within the European Union. But this is this is a necessity. So in order for Poland to remain this liberal camp within a neighborhood that is a very different to some extent, we need to have a consolidation of powers in the liberal hands, and I wish for that to happen in May. And a part of that, I am worried when I look at Germany, especially at the recent polls showing that the illiberal forces in Germany are actually getting stronger and stronger. But again, I think that I stop here because it's not so much time left. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica. Before I turn to you, Daniel, I just would like to remind everybody watching that they can write down their questions, because as we are wrapping up, as we come to an end to my list of questions, we will try to address whatever our listeners is interested in. Please, Daniel, take the floor.
Thank you so much. I just would like to add potentially 2 trends to this list, what we can expect over 2025. One is rather geopolitical within the EU, but obviously related to radical right liberal forces, and it is that very soon, instead of the Hungarian-Slovak axis, we can have a true disruptive Habsburg minilateral within the European Union. Austria and Czechia potentially also joining this club in the autumn. I'm not stating that all of the leaders and leading parties of these 4 countries have the same disruptive and illiberal potential, but I think this can be an alliance with really a critical mass within the European Union that may undermine also the responsiveness of the European Union in strategic issues related to Ukraine, Russia, and so on. And I am not sure whether the European Union is institutionally prepared for the eventuality. It struggled even with 2 member states acting disruptively in EU decision-making processes, and soon it can have 4. And the second trend, I am definitely not a disinformation or FIMI expert, but I think what we experienced in the Romanian elections, that can very easily be the new normal at European elections. And we also need to be prepared that the EU and especially the European Commission already has struggled a lot with major platforms. But I don't think that until now, anyone would have categorized X or Meta as actually hostile actors. And sorry to say this, but they become ones. And we are in a situation that actually the largest platforms have clear political preferences in the European party landscape. These preferences are in the illiberal radical right corner. They are interfering actually without consequences. And it will be a huge challenge for the European Commission actually how to enforce the Digital Services Act and the Digital Media Act against an X, which is owned actually by a Secretary of State of the US government. I am personally convinced that what we have seen, for example, with regard to the conversation between Elon Musk and Alice Weidel hearing in Germany, potentially and hopefully it was just an interim thing, because Musk will be also more responsible or need to be more responsible as a US state official. But it's far from being certain that he will, and it will be an enormous political challenge to actually counter those interferences which are coming from officials serving in NATO member states, allied NATO member states. Yes, these will be my 2 cents to the trends in 2025 related to the European radical right.
Thank you so much. The list of things that we couldn't cover gets longer and longer. Unfortunately, we need to do this again sometime soon. But before that, Laszlo, would you like to add anything on this?
Well, this is a huge topic that would deserve actually another meeting, illiberalism. Let me just very briefly, it's not an optimistic, but more saying what the challenge is that it's, we always talk about the illiberal increase, but not about why the centrist parties lose out, why they get weaker and weaker. And that has to do with the process that started several decades ago. Until the time when market and liberalization was seen as solving problems of social and economic governance that democracies are not, or were seen not to be able to manage. And so there was a very strong withdrawal from using democracy as a way of organizing societies, a way of organizing economies. That was the post-war settlement in Western Europe was based on that. that the centrist parties were competing with each other, how to make economic work better for the interest of broad social coalitions. And the departure from that to trust in supranational hierarchies, technocratic leaders, and also supranational markets resulted in basically in something that I think Merkel gave a very good name, market-conform democracies, where democracies are there to serve the freer working of and more efficient working of markets. And until the centrist parties of left and right will not move away from that, they feed with these and several other mistakes. This is just one of the mistakes, but several other mistakes, the illiberalism. So this is a longer-term process, and hopefully there will be good examples soon.
Thank you, Laszlo. We are just checking the chat right now to see if we have any questions. And it seems like our audience is taking in all the fantastic insights today. Sometimes the best discussions leave us with more to think about than immediate questions. We are about out of time, just about out of time, but is there anything you would like to add? Well, I know I said we still have a lot to cover today, but I am quite happy with how much we have covered in this short session. As we conclude this discussion, I want to thank our panelists for their brilliant contributions. Many thanks to the CEU Democracy Institute and the Review of Democracy for hosting this event. And of course, thank you to our audience, live audience, and people who are watching later for making this possible. Wishing you all a wonderful day and that we continue these important conversations beyond this panel. Goodbye for now.